Version 2. Aunt May was asleep, used tissues filling her lap. The figure 2 took a step back, opened the front door and bled into the night. I don't remember the pain and I don't remember dying. A third bang. Angel. Aunt May was trying to appear calm for my sake, but I could tell that she was scared, her frantic eyes searching mine. Liam 2 Oliver is dead. Spots of red dotted, yellowing tiles, a river trickling under my aunt's heels. It was jarring to see something in him finally start to splinter. I was frowning at the trash can by the door, my cotton candy brain trying to figure out if I would be able to make it in time, when a small voice drifted from the doorway startling me. So I can catch him. She grabbed my shoulders, her nails stabbing into my skin. She was trying to hold it together, trying to understand. I waited for grief to catch up with me, drowning me in a hollow oblivion that I wouldn't be able to claw myself out of. I watched his mouth move, a single curve of his upper lip wrenching my body from my control, slamming me against a tree. But I didn't feel sad. I wasn't expecting him to burst out laughing, trembling with hysteria. His eyes were wild, feral, and drawn, almost euphoric, with what I could only recognize as relief. Twin gaping slits, a slice through a torn shirt resembling glass wings that were not yet formed, reminding me of a butterfly. In Jude's eyes, I was ready for retirement. Every little noise sent her twisting around. She shook her head. But before I could envelop myself in that darkness, it was spitting me back out. Charlie. When I awoke, I was dressed in an evening gown, a dress that used to be my mother's. Happy 78th birthday, Emily 2. Mom was curled up on the floor, lying in slow-spreading red that wouldn't stop, seeping across her beaded rug. So, death had sent a foot soldier. I nodded to my disgruntled classmate trying to dodge my aunt's prodding. At first, I thought that he was snapping Polaroids. You're okay, Emily 2. When I got closer, though, blinking in the eerie dark, I caught something. Jude's voice sent me twisting around. Your memory should be returning soon. I'm going to get you help, Aunt May said in a low murmur when we were back at the house. Something sharp was protruding into my flesh and no matter how many times I violently wrenched my arm it was stuck. Judging from her face, however, she agreed with the boy. After losing my sister and my niece and nephew, I made a deal to give my last surviving niece 100 years of life. I opened up your body bag that I had just zipped up, and I told your aunt that you were a miracle. I can't understand. The nurse sounded like she was trying to choke down a laugh or maybe a sob. But his body was so limp, so still that every part of him was faltering. Instead, a ghost boy stood silently, running his thumb down the teeth of his knife while he ripped my lungs apart. Liam 2 Oliver, the dead boy, was in fact my aunt's prisoner. Behind him was the girl who looked so much like Lily. Aunt May's eyes darkened. Liam 2 Oliver had grown up with me. At the summer fair, Jude convinced me to try apple bobbing, only for my head to conveniently get stuck underwater. Jude's experiments were worrying. On my 18th birthday, I was stuffing books in my locker when my cousin popped up out of nowhere, scowling as usual. His gasp for air was painful, strangled, eyes opening wide, terrified. Chicken, raw bacon, leftover salad. A nothing that I found myself gravitating towards. Sure it is. I could see where his lips had been stitched shut and then ripped open. Hi. He held up his hands in an awkward wave. Liam 2 flinched, his stoic expression crumpling. Her eyes were raw from crying and clinging on to me, her shuddery voice reassuring me that I was going to be okay. Exhaustion. Aunt May pressed her face into my shoulder and I could feel her tears soaking into my shirt. Aunt May's smile faded. Dead. You were dead for 13 minutes. She took slow steps towards me, her eyes growing frenzied, like she couldn't understand me, like I was a puzzle that she could not solve, and it was driving her crazy. I felt warm and sticky, lying in my own blood. Charlie?" The nurse's voice was like a wind chime. Behind him, my siblings still weren't moving. Mom never explained it, but our grandparents left everything to May. The house was like a palace, a labyrinth of floors that I was yet to explore, and 2 swimming pools. I was in the kitchen cutting myself a slice of cake when out of nowhere a dead boy came rushing at me. With one of my aunt's favorite kitchen knives, a dead boy who I immediately recognized. On my 17th birthday, I was sick and bad with gastritis. My cousin got closer, his breath tickling my cheek. The nurse moved closer and yet kept her distance. I could feel myself moving back, panic writhing through me. I sat very still with my knees to my chest, my gaze fixed on my siblings. "Charlie, I want you to listen to me, okay?" When my eyes found the rapidly darkening sky, my aunt forced me to look at her. Emily too. She was as scared as me, her voice shuddering. PJ was convinced that our younger cousin was a serial killer. Several months earlier, he had happily showed us the roadkill that he had been growing bacteria on under his bed. The rest of us were redheads. Further down the trail, Jem was lying crumpled in the dirt, his camera smashed to pieces next to him, blood running in thick rivulets down his temple. There he was, leaning against a tree, his arms folded. Liam too. Oliver was not dead, but just like me, he should have been. Shit. Just like when he was a kid, he traced the teeth of his blade down my throat. There was something around my throat, choking the breath from my lungs, a thick fog spreading over my eyes. Following his mouth curving into silent letters, I could feel my feet slowly leaving the ground, my legs dangling. I remember taking a slow step back, my gaze glued to the knife. I remembered how to run, stumbling over my feet, but I couldn't move. They refused to believe that death was coming to reclaim my soul and was using a dead boy to do his dirty work. For my 16th birthday, I braced myself to come face to face with Liam too. Oliver's ghost. Lily was still smiling, strawberry blonde ringlets stained red. I couldn't see PJ's face anymore. Bang! I didn't feel the gunshot, I didn't feel anything. Looking down, I glimpsed slowly spreading, red blossoming like a flower. It felt like being cut from strings. I hit the ground, just like my mother. My body felt heavy and wrong, paralyzed. I remember being unable to scream, unable to cry, the salty taste of metal filling my mouth. It was like being winded. My cousin clamped his hand on my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "It's only a party, I'm having some friends over, and no, we won't go anywhere near your room." She was all over me, slick on my skin and caked in my fingernails. I tried to jump up only for my aunt to gently lower me back down. "I'm not lying. Sweetie," she spoke softly, squeezing my hands. "If a child cannot be stolen from the human world, they can, however, be made, molded and shaped from their human forms, skinned of their humanity through their suffering, leaving a hollowed-out shell in the child's place." Hey! According to my cousin, my party was unexpectedly cancelled every year. I wasn't sure if it was his weird superiority complex or just plain jealousy, but it was getting exhausting. "You should be dead," Jude grumbled. The times that we did play with them, our cousin showed us his spider collection, or the raccoon brain that he kept in a jar. At the far end of the table sat my Aunt May. Kissing the rim of her glass, her smile was twisted. Slowly, my eyes found stab wounds splitting open his torso, raw flesh where his skin had been torched, melting and then merging, ripped apart and put back together over and over again. I found his heart, the gaping cavern in his chest where it should be. My Aunt May was sitting next to me on a plastic chair, her warm fingers entangled in mine. Aunt May and Mom were practically twins with the same thick red hair and pale skin. Death seemed to have finally left me alone. Aunt May cleared her throat. My cousin's eyes widened. Dried blood is smearing his right temple and a cavernous hole in his chest. My cousin was peeking through the door, hiding behind a shock of dark brown curls. Jude was the only brunette in our family. Hiding under a hooded sweatshirt, Liam too appeared older, like he had grown up with me. But there was a startling vacancy in his expression that drew the breath from my lungs, freezing me in place. Still no ghost boy. When I woke up again, my head was a lot less heavy, and the nurse was gone. On my 8th birthday, a figure 2 strode into my house and shot me and my family dead. Calm down, you're embarrassing yourself. His lips split into a demented giggle. I couldn't breathe, couldn't conjure words in my mouth. No, dragged by their hair. Jude had always hid behind a 10-foot wall in his mind. I did very slowly. I barely felt the impact, only a dull, thudding pain. I could hear the ghost boy's footsteps, his uneven, shuddering breaths as he catapulted into a run. She was frozen mid-run, dressed in ragged jeans and a t-shirt. Jude backed away with a 2-fingered salute. Happy 78th birthday. He shoved me back, losing his facade. Stay the hell away from the house tonight, he said, and his voice, his tone was enough to send shivers creeping down my spine. Squeezing my eyes shut, I waited to finally die. I felt it tightening its grip around my brain, dragging me back into a mountain of pillows when I tried to jump up. He lowered his voice into a whisper. The nurse spoke up. I could see her trembling hands. When I risked a look at Jem, the boy was staring at me dazedly, like I really was crazy. I rolled onto my back, trying to suck in the air. Trying to hold it together, trying to understand. The nurse's voice was eerily cold. I wasn't even in town, I was staying at a friend's house. May forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her words were white noise, my gaze glued to my birthday presents. I couldn't call them human anymore. I couldn't call Liam too human when his face was so beautifully grotesque, painfully hypnotizing. The monstrous things sticking from twin slits in his back were supposed to be wings, but except they looked wrong, cruelly protruding from his exposed skin. Dead flowers threaded through cavernous, gaping eye sockets. Lily and PJ were dead, and it was like losing them all over again. As clarity came over me, I found my voice, a strangled cry escaping my lips. They were asleep. I see dead people. The bullet went through the right ventricle of your heart and severely damaged your left lung, rendering you unable to breathe. Your heart stopped, and after 4 attempts to resuscitate, we called it. Her voice splintered. You need to come to terms with that, okay? When I didn't, she pinched my chin, forcing me to look at her. In the corner of my eye, my cousin was leaning against the door, mid-eye roll. Cruel fingers wound their way through my hair and shoved me to my knees. So, the nurse spoke calmly. His head snapped in the direction that my aunt was coming from. They're just sleeping. I could tell myself they were, as long as I didn't look at the splatter of scarlet staining the back of the couch and pooling at their feet. Mom, Jude muttered, hiding behind his glass. I was floating, hovering off the ground, suspended by his words. Reaching for my glass of water, I found it empty. Human, and yet I couldn't call his beautifully grotesque face human. Liam too. Oliver had grown up with me, now an adult, 18 years old. I remember saying his name, my voice slurring slightly. It started small. It's my birthday. The king required 2 human sacrifices to suffer in your place, she concluded, for 100 years. The burning hatred that death had filled him with was stronger, hollowing him out completely. I managed 2 shaky steps before I felt him, an unearthly force winding its way around my spine. Iron ingrained into his skin, vines, flowers, and vine, iron ingrained into his skin, vines, flowers, and ivy entangling his bones, polluting his blood. Still though, my cousin was right. I was stone cold dead, and then I was somehow alive. His clothes painted stained in bright red, glued in sticky mounds clinging to him. The boy's eyes were wild, feral like an animal. She stood up and was handed a sacrificial knife. Something slimy wound its way up my throat when she began to pace the room. Under the influence of alcohol earlier, the girl made me smile. Her wings, to me, looked like one of a real fairy, but in reality, they were torn and shredded apart, bigger than the girl herself. Emily too. The two of them were violently shoved into the empty pool. Like every death, every time they suffered, my body became progressively less human. I felt disgusting. It didn't feel right to be able to breathe so easily. Death had turned his foot soldier and my future killer into an angel. I remembered how to run, stumbling over my feet, but I couldn't move. Jude was sitting on the kitchen counter, legs swinging. I could feel his penetrating gaze burning into the back of my head. When we were little, PJ would drag Lily and me down the trail to escape Jude's weird experiments. I decided to invite Jem Littlewood on a summer walk. Jem was cute, but in a dorky way he was chronically clumsy and dressed like he had been spat out of a John Hughes movie. We hiked all the way to the end of the river and had a picnic, watching the sun set over the horizon. Jude, please demonstrate, sweetheart. Liam too. Oliver is dead, my aunt said firmly, shaking me. I did all the paperwork. I knew the second that I woke that my mom was dead. I could tell that it thrilled him, my trembling hands, my sharp, heavy breathing that I couldn't control. A tuna salad with a protein milkshake. Tugging at the 4 in my wrist, I tried to yank the needle from my skin. I guess the boy wasn't expecting other humans to intrude. I'm sorry, he was wearing a crown. It took me 2 minutes. Ignoring my friend bleeding out, Liam too stumbled over himself, abandoning his feast. He took a single step towards me, backing me against the wall, coming so close, close enough for me to feel his very real breath grazing my cheeks. I lunged forward, slamming my hands over my ears. Jude shrugged. Hatred that seemed to puppeteer him. Wings. His clothes confused me, a single white shirt and shorts. I could see it again. So much blood. Jude never admitted it, but he was definitely embarrassed of being the odd one out. My siblings may be dead, but they were still redheads. A slow beeping sound tearing me from slumber. Into my blood, spider webbing and expanding in my brain without moving a muscle. Bang. Holy shit, I thought. My mouth was dry and full of cotton. There was a sudden tightness, a sharp and cruel sting in my wrist. It started to make sense. You survived and he didn't. He was their puppet on display, dancing for their entertainment. Half-lidded eyes drowned in oblivion, found mine, and I understood his hatred. His face had been contorted into a monster, gnashing teeth and sharp points in his ears, a sickly tinge to malnourished skin. Lily and PJ looked like they were sleeping and I could almost believe it. I didn't look at the figure two. I was barely aware of the gunshot. His hair was longer, a mess of reddish curls matted to his forehead. When I was fully conscious, Aunt May was checking over Jam, helping him set up. The king demanded a debt. Now, of course, our king did not give you life for free, May continued. I'm having friends over, he rolled his eyes. My aunt knelt in front of me, her expression crumbling. There was a nurse pottering around, checking my vitals and prodding my arms. After that incident, death left me alone for a while. I was 15, walking through the forest with a friend, catching fireflies in bell jars. I don't want you to come live with us. I could see it in her twitching hands, her wobbling lips that were trying and failing to appear stoic. How the hell are you alive, Charlie? I think I passed out after that. I locked every door in the house and I taped up my friend's window. Nothing happened. I want you to stay away. Before I could reply, he stepped back like I was diseased. The figure too had a voice. Charlie, it's past curfew. Climbing into the swimming pool herself, she strode over to Liam too. Before she closed her eyes, Mom told me to run. No more fairy tales. I would choke on things that I wasn't supposed to choke on. His slow spreading smile caught me off guard. Get it out, I whispered in a shrill cry. Jem made a snorting noise. Mom wore her hair in a casual ponytail while May preferred a strict bun. Jude's murmur followed me creeping into the dark. "Have it your way, dude." My eyes felt heavy. I had to blink several times to keep myself awake. My cousin stood in the exact same robes that he wore as a child. "I never said you didn't." Now a teenager, yet his face was carved into something else entirely. I couldn't wash her off of me. "I'm just going to take photos," Jem beamed, holding up his camera. I had to bite back the urge to say, "Don't you have enough photos?" I nodded and he turned and sprinted back down the trail, before his footsteps ground to a sudden halt. He caught my eye for half a second before averting his gaze. When my aunt was ushering kids back to the pool, Jude came to crouch in front of me. Ever since I had started living with him, he had made sure to keep his distance. Liam II Oliver. The king demanded a debt, as well as 2 heirs to join him in his court once your 100 years were complete. Her lips quirked into a smile. "Charlie, answer me right now." By the time that I was 18, I had bitten 3 therapists. He knocked Jem out, I managed, and then he tried to kill me. Jem surprised me with a scoff. She was speaking so casually, ignoring Liam II's whimpers. "The transformation takes a while, 100 years to birth a fully blooded Fey heir who will lose their human memories in preparation to join their new family." Jude shot Ren in the chest, his eyes empty. This time he dropped his weapon using finger guns instead. Bang, he deadpanned, and then the neck. I watched Ren come back to life and then die over and over again. I think at one point he screamed and cried, but not now. Sound bled away and all I heard was his slow, deep breathing. "I ignored this when you were a kid, but if you continue to use this poor boy as a coping mechanism, then I'll have no choice but to send you to a specialist." When Jem was taken away by paramedics, Aunt May held my hand, squeezing my fingers for dear life. "Rotting. You were on the live and you asked me for an apple soda. Liam II died at 8 years old in a terrible accident and you can't keep using him as an excuse for your mental trauma." There was something twitching in her expression that I was trying to make sense of. My gaze glued to the tiny spots of blood staining the insertion point. I wasn't supposed to be alive. But I wasn't looking at the spillage of food seeping across the floor. "I think that's why my aunt chose her. Your presence will ruin the vibe." He groaned, tipping his head back. "Yeah, I know, but I think you can deal with the attention off of you for one night." "Jude, will Liam II Oliver be there too?" Jem Littlewood hollered. Jude didn't respond for a moment, his lip curling shut. "The hell up," he spat at Jem, who immediately backed down. With an audience this time, Jude forced an award-winning smile. "Why?" His lips curved into a smirk. In my drunken state, I found myself marveling at my aunt's house and how much of it was left unexplored. For example, in the foyer past the spiral staircase that she had custom-made was an elevator that I had never questioned. This time, though, the darkness was starving. The guy couldn't seem to sit still, jumping to his feet to marvel at tiny specks of light dancing in the air. Aunt May nodded at me, her lips forming a proud smile. The boy no longer resembled a human, feral eyes and a demonic smile choking down pieces of cake. Twisting around, I found myself gravitating towards warm golden light. The king is smart. The world started to move again, started to make sense again, when she cupped my cheeks and told me to breathe. Again, stabbed, branded and burned and ripped apart. Aunt May was in her office on the ground floor, and Jude was getting high in his room. He scowled at me, getting my age purposely wrong as usual before running off. Aunt May handed me a glass of water and I drained it in one gulp. The air was thick, so hard to breathe. Aunt May was lucky to live so close to the forest, the entrance just outside of her back door. He hesitated, his bare feet pivoting in the dirt if he was considering finishing me off. I think I tried to move, but I was so tired. "Turn around, kid." I couldn't scream. He was drowning me, bleeding into my blood, spider webbing and expanding in my brain without moving a muscle. When he turned and ran, I was released, slipping to the ground, trying and failing to draw in breath. "You're seriously blaming your psychotic break on a dead kid?" Aunt May pursed her lips, motioning for Jem to be quiet. "He stuffed mushrooms down my brother's ears while he was sleeping too, and I quote, recreate The Last of Us 1. Lily had a nosebleed during Thanksgiving dinner and Jude collected all of her bloody tissues and refused to tell us where he had put them and what he had done with them. Fast forward 2 months and I found them under a nest of spiders. Jude was trying to adapt the spiders to be able to feed on human blood. I was surprised my cousin hadn't immediately demanded to see my siblings' dead bodies for autopsy." Jude stepped into the room, shuffling his feet. "I'm sorry about Lily, PJ and Aunt Ivy," he mumbled, glaring at the floor tiles. My cousin made no move to offer real sympathy, instead speaking to the floor. "But I don't want you to come live with us." Jude lifted his head, looking me dead in the eye. "I don't like you, Charlie. I want you to stay away." Before I could reply, he stepped Charlie. I didn't feel angry. I wanted to know why my family were dead. Liam 2's body was its canvas, and every time that I got away, he was punished, painting his failures across the scarred skin. When she dropped onto her stomach, she was dragged back to her feet, her knees buckling under the weight. I saw the blood stemming around him in a halo before the bleeding pool faltered, seeping back inside his head, like rewinding a VCR. Liam 2 was dead, and then he was alive. The sudden image of maggots crawling up my brother's nose sent me lurching into a sitting position, my stomach heaving. Eyes ignited. Happy 68th birthday. I was mildly tipsy, sitting on the edge of the pool, dangling my legs in the water when my friend demanded more beers. My sister's head was nestled on his shoulder, thick beads of red running down her face. Liam 2 studied me with lazy eyes, sucking on his bottom lap. Chips, candy, ice cream. "Now, of course, our king did not give you life for free," May continued. Aunt May's voice came from my right, stabling me back to reality. My right, stabling me back to reality. Jem let out a bitter laugh. Death had dressed him in shackles of ivy, a crown of glass and bone forced onto his head, entangled in his curls. Death was torturing him. Lily gently tipped into PJ like she was going to sleep. To PJ like she was going to sleep. Liam 2 didn't look like a ghost boy anymore. Jude stepped in front of me, and for the first time in a while, he wasn't trying to hide disdain for me. His dark eyes pinned me in place for a moment, the world around us coming to a halt. "Okay, can you describe the boy to me, Emily 2? He was wearing a crown and he looked my age." Aunt May cocked her head and I saw a real worry, like she was trying not to freak out. There was something there, an unexplainable twitch in his eyes and lips that twisted my gut. Jude stepped closer, his lip curling. Mom's body dropped to the ground. "Anyway, when I came back to you, you were awake inside your body bag." I prodded at my throat, clawing for the indentions where his phantom fingers had snaked around my neck, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The dead boy prided himself in slow, intimidating steps, shoving me against the wall and dragging the blade of the knife down the curve of my throat. From the comfort of my knees, I waited for my brother to lift his head. For a long time our family has lived among creatures who live in the forest. You played inside in exchange for keeping this town safe. They only ask for small favors. Wayward children who disappear into the woods are good enough for payment. Charlie, you and your siblings do not share our inheritance. Your mother never wanted fey children. She wanted you to be human. Instead, my gaze found a crown of antlers, both human and animal bone entangled with dead flowers and human remains, glued to a head of familiar matted brown curls. There was something sticking out of battered and bruised flesh. The town launched a full investigation only to find his body in a ditch about a week later. I was having conflicted feelings for this guy. I wanted to know why I was breathing and their skin was ice cold. The next thing I knew, I was in a white room. I did see him, I gritted out. I kept quiet about his spider collection to his popular friends, and he tolerated my existence until I left for college. Liam too fell over himself, shuffling on his hands and knees before diving to his feet. The boy slumped to the floor, trembling, his knees against his chest. Aunt May grabbed him by the hair, forcing his head up and sliced the blade across his throat. I was suffocating, sinking into that peaceful oblivion that I met at 8 years old. This time, though, the darkness was starving. But not the wings that I dreamed of as a kid. I was also hungry for cake, and so I stumbled inside in search of it. The house was dark, lit in dazzling blue by the pool's lights reflecting through the windows. Aunt May had to perform the Heimlich maneuver when I choked on a piece of chicken. I thought that I was just really unlucky, but then I locked myself in a freezer that didn't have a lock, and I almost drowned in the local swimming pool, catching my foot in a stray netting. Rolling onto my side, all I could see was flickering candlelight. Slowly, my foggy brain began to find itself and connect the dots. Slowly tilting his head, the boy's lips split into a grin, eyes filled with, polluted by mania. Your niece is a wackadoodle. My eyes found daylight, a scream clawing out of my mouth. I could see the trauma of them slicing through his flesh, monstrous looming things protruding from what was left of a human spine. Before he was shot again, stabbed, branded and burned and ripped apart. Sit up straight, Emily too. You were in an accident, sweetie. Bang. He picked up a knife from the counter, throwing it like a dart straight through the guy's throat. Her voice was starting to break. Emily too. Staggering back, Liam too's eyes widened and the suffocating hold on me had severed. Yes, I insisted, getting progressively more frustrated. In fact, I just pulled you out of the morgue, honey. I waited for the pain and to lose my breath once more, but death was playing with me. When I opened my eyes, the dead boy was gone and I was on my knees screaming, Red Oliver is trying to kill me. She told me that I would be living with her from now on, before wrapping me into a hug and leaving to get a coffee. Keep still, she murmured, smoothing his band-aid. I was supposed to die with my family that night, and death was out to get me. And death started to get clever, changing his tactic. Where did he go? I managed to get out, scanning the darkness for Liam too. Oh, he's okay, just concussed, May whispered, dialing 911. Liam too's feet were bare, battered and bruised, blood smearing my aunt's tiles. At some point, I screamed at them to stop. I was 6 months older than him. But there was nothing. Several years prior, he had gone missing from his parents' yard. I didn't drink that much, but I could barely coerce words, my head spinning. Liam too's neck snapped towards me, his eyes narrowing with resentment that I couldn't understand. I was slowly moving towards her when a sudden bang sounded from the kitchen, the bang of something shattering on the floor. I pretended not to notice her forced lipstick smile, the way she stood with her arms folded, staring at me like I was one of my cousin's experiments. The ghost boy. When he moved on to the cupcakes, licking frosting from his fingers, I glimpsed markings on his arms, a language that I didn't understand carved into him. His wrists were shackled, bounded in tangled iron and vine. I pulled off his cap with a smile, throwing it in his face. Jude was a weird kid. Not a fan of the chocolate flavor. This kid had serious mommy issues. I blinked and the world resumed, kids pushing past us. Instead of using everyday things to try to kill me, he sent in reinforcements. Charlie, I know you lost your family, but you and Red Oliver are not the same. I had to bite back the urge to yank my hand away. Growing up, I realized that death was not so subtly attempting to fix his mistake. Everything about her stood out, bringing me to a sobering halt. Liam too's death was announced as an accident, though his wound suggested the opposite. Aunt May was rich. Just, try and rest, okay? I wanted to ask where my family was, but I already knew the answer. Ignoring my cousin, Aunt May tapped her glass with a fork and marked my birthday presents. His mother and my auntie had inherited the family house, so in his mind, that made him superior. Jude made it clear that he didn't like his cousins, refusing to let us play with them and banning us from family gatherings. I was sitting at a banquet. Once my aunt was gone, another nurse came to prod my fore. I tried to sleep, but the uncomfortable tightness of the needles sticking into my skin and the sterile white lights in my eyes made it impossible. His eyes flicked to me and I swore that he smiled. The bullet went straight through his head, the winged boy hitting the ground. "Get it out," I shrieked. Aunt May's smile was suddenly sad and she lifted her glass in a toast. "Your surprise party's cancelled." Marked, carved, and branded with a symbol resembling an axe. I don't even think that he had noticed me, gorging himself on anything that he could get his hands on. My vision cleared and I found myself sitting in an unfamiliar room resembling an abandoned swimming hall. The pool itself was empty, the bottom stained, revealing scarlet. I had a vague memory of roses spreading across my shirt, like summer flowers blooming. Everything was white, the walls, the ceiling, and my clothes. Even then, though I wasn't even looking at her, I was trying to find his ignited eyes lighting up the dark. I watched booted feet crunch through glass. I can't remember how long I was unconscious for. Liam too's body contorted, his chest inflating. There was a girl my age standing on the staircase. "Oh wow, that stings." "Fine. You died, Charlie." Hey, I know it sounds crazy, but death had sent Liam to Oliver to kill me, just like my family. He tried to kill me when I was 12 too. The dead boy's lips moved again, this time in a curse. I should have been running for my life, but I was mesmerized by each symbol cruelly carved into his neck. The boy did a slow head incline as if he couldn't believe that I was standing in front of him. The world tipped off kilter and I was on my knees and in my stomach. I sunk to the floor and my thoughts swimming. Jude seemed to catch himself slipping back under his mask. "I told you not to come home." And it was. And I think she knew that too. When I opened my mouth to ask where my family were, she lightly shook her head and I swallowed my words. Which was wrong. Aunt May set a cup of cocoa on the table. Getting closer and closer, and slowly, fight or flight began to take over. Making it halfway across the living room, my palms slick with my mother's blood, I thought that I was going to live. I managed to hiss. "I'm not sure what death feels like because it's like going to sleep." I remember my last shuddering breaths, a lulling darkness beginning to swallow me up. I don't know why I wasn't afraid. Oblivion almost felt like sinking into lukewarm depths on a summer's day. Oblivion wasn't pain and there wasn't a peaceful inevitability to it. It was endless nothing. PJ's head slumped forward. I could feel my mind starting to unravel. Jude stood, pulling out a gun and aiming it at the winged girl. Bang! The girl's body hit the tiles, her blood seeping across stained white. The boy didn't move. I couldn't breathe, slamming my hands over my ears and begging them. But Aunt May didn't listen, ordering for my hands to be tied down. More of a monster with slight points to his ears and two sharp teeth. Twisting around, I found myself gravitating towards warm golden light. Every single year of my life, every breath that I had taken was stolen. Jude followed me down the hallway, matching my stride. Jude was in front of me, sipping on wine. Her tiara of flowers and bone looked pretty to me when I saw her on the stairs. Now, though, I could see the pearly white of a human child's skull forced onto her head. Jem was obsessed with fireflies, though he seemed more interested in photographing them than me. Liam too's fingers were wrapped around the handle like he knew exactly how to use it, how to plunge it into my heart and kill me for good. He moved like a predator, zero self-awareness or recognition, only driven to kill me. The girl reminded me of my sister, or at least if my sister had ever grown up. I wasn't sure why he was dressed up like a ghost draped in a white cloak that was way too big for him. She was looking for something. I could feel his fingers pinching the material of my jacket. Under a late-setting sun, I watched his dancing figure disappear into the trees. "You idiot." There were symbols carved into each tile, like a game. When I didn't move, the protruding metal stabbed into my neck. I wasn't sure if I was drunk or hallucinating. He didn't speak, only smiled, reveling in my fear. I want to know when you see him again. I caught her gaze scanning the trees around us, delving into twisting oblivion. Bending down, I picked up a bell jar still spilling fireflies. A teasing smile was still frozen on his lips. I can't remember how long I stayed under the shattered remains of Mom's favorite table. In the corner of my eye, my cousin was leaning against the door, mid-eye roll. His lips split into a grin that I knew he hated. She told me that I was a miracle. Aunt May didn't say much, and when she did, she broke into sobs. This time, he didn't hesitate. Another bang. My aunt applied a dressing to Jem's wound, ignoring the boy's hisses. The sensation hit me in slow waves. Got away, he was punished, painting his failures across a scarred skin. After an unexpected growth spurt and losing a ton of baby fat, my cousin had scaled the high school hierarchy, swapping his weird experiments for a varsity jacket and experimenting with his sexuality. The two of us had come to an unspoken truce. I remember the phantom legs of a spider creeping down the back of my neck when the figure two with no face dragged the barrel of his gun down my spine. Turn around. But dead boys, and especially dead boys molded into death's personal soldiers, and especially dead boys molded into death's personal soldiers. Jude leaned against my locker, running a hand through thick dark hair tucked under her baseball cap. I was watching their blood trickle down each tile in the pool. When one of my friends stumbled into the kitchen, Liam too reacted on impulse. When my aunt's footsteps grew louder, branches snapping under her shoes as something contorted in the boy's face. Fear. The kids surrounding me started to giggle, whispering among themselves. Can you just not come home tonight? I quickened my pace. In a sense, I wished that I had listened to my cousin. 4 of us, a crate of beers, and no sign of my cousin. This time, though, Jude leaned uncomfortably close, a sparkle in his eyes that I had never seen before. Inclining his head, he rocked back and forth on his heels, prodding me in the forehead. If you see the dead boy again, can you tell me? His lips curved into a smile. When the adults were drinking cocktails and losing their awareness, Jude ordered us around. Through half-lidded eyes, I caught the glint of a blade in his fist, but I couldn't move. I remember it vividly, every detail, every angle etched and stained into my memory. The sensation of throwing up felt familiar, almost comforting. Mom was always with me when I was sick, holding my hair back and lulling my hysteria with reassuring murmurs. Taking a slow and sobering breath, the nurse tried to smile. They could materialize anywhere. What happened, Emily too? She pushed me over, Jem groaned, shuffling away from me when my aunt told him to stay calm. He straightened up, leaning against the tree that Psycho tried to kill me. When my aunt's gaze flicked at me, I shook my head. It was Liam too, Oliver, I gritted, teetering on hysteria. I could tell she didn't believe me, but I couldn't stop myself. These things were unnatural mounds that both did and didn't make sense on a human boy. I could see the trauma of them slicing through his flesh. These things were unnatural mounts that both did and didn't make sense on a human boy. And that's when it hit me, watching him stuff himself with food. Something slimy inched its way up my throat. The first thing that I saw was the refrigerator door hanging open, and someone, something, rooting around inside it. Glued to the spot, I dazedly watched it grab milk, guzzle it down, and then soda, cracking open each can and sucking them dry, before carving its fingers into my birthday cake. He lost his slick bravado, grabbing for his cap. Mission unsuccessful, I had guessed. Emily too, you were pronounced dead at 3:02 a.m. from a gunshot wound to the chest. Your death certificate was signed and your body was taken to the morgue to be prepped for transportation. And then I had my lunch. My party was a success, well, sort of. Aunt May's voice had turned cold. Something shattered inside of my mind. I turned 12 years old and my aunt threw me a huge party, inviting all my classmates. I've been waiting so long to give you your birthday present, Emily too. The figure 2 was waiting for me to move, to make a noise. But there was nothing angelic about the dead boy. His body and mind sculpted and molded into death's own.